will come when the many subdivisions of evangelism will grasp the divine purpose of this new order obtains. The movement of spirit-related exchange between the two spheres is growing wider each day. The devotion of discarnates is drawing the attention of incarnates. The Lord has permitted a worldwide Pentecost for readjustments to the eternal reality. It is noteworthy, however, that the touching and the reverberating voices from the other side usually repeat the age-old formulas of revelations, and they recall the past of earthly wisdom in order to extract more respectable concepts about life. It is this point that we remember John's word and ask sincerely, do the dead really communicate with the living? If so, why are people unaware of this truth? Fear not. If the departed once again speak to those who remain behind, it is because the latter do, in fact, know that the weight of redemption through Jesus, but because they are neither motivated nor determined to follow it. In this message, Emmanuel opens up his teachings to make a question whether do we is it only Spiritism that believes in spirituality? But in fact, he mentions and he actually states that this is not only to the Spiritist school, but actually to all Christian community. As we can see, there are many stories within the Catholic or even other Christian branches that mention parts of the Bible, such as the day that Jesus rise to the heavens. That is a form of spiritualism that other Christian community actually believes in, but they actually don't see it, or at least see it the same way as Spiritists do. And this is why he says that for every acquisition has a price, because in the book of the Gospel according to Spiritism, the third revelation that Allan Kardec mentions is that Spiritism is the revelation. And this is the new acquisition that he is mentioning, that other Christian communities might have a difficulty understanding this new acquisition. But even though those who have left this earth, this life, they actually devote their time to teach us that the only way through to Jesus, it is through understanding our life in this material world and how we should live not attached to them. And he finishes the reading by saying that it is not that others might not believe that this new concept of spiritualism do exist, but in fact they do, but they are not motivated to follow it. So that's all for the reading, and I'd like to transfer over to Hendrik for the reading time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to ask our Master Jesus for his inspiration, and that our evening, during this evening, we may have a good conversation about one of his teachings and the teachings of the Gospel according to Spiritism, as Zhu mentioned earlier in her reading. So, as we are doing every Monday, we're going through the Gospel according to Spiritism in sections, as they are split, as they were split into different topics and subtopics. So every chapter in the book has a few items, and some of these items are grouped in different, in sort of just topics around a larger discussion, which is the chapter. And I like to point out, at least to our, in these discussions in English, the beauty that that is this book, and the way that Allan Kardec was able to to take the different messages and all of the morals through the messages that were received from the spirits as they were doing their studies in France and throughout Europe in the 1850s and 60s. And the way that he organized the book is very interesting. I like to remember how the first chapter of the book starts with, obviously past the introduction, right? The introduction goes about discussing some precursors or some previous points in history where we got different the message that came, from Jesus all the way to us, but even before Jesus. He mentions Plato, he mentions Socrates, and a lot goes through that. But the organization of the book itself starts with chapter 1 that says, "I have not come to break any, what is it called? I have not come to break any laws, but to fulfill them, to destroy the law." And then where Kardec introduces, the idea of Spiritism and how the morals of the Christian message are related to us by the spirits, but also related to Spiritism in general in its religious aspirations. So chapter 2, he talks about "My kingdom is not of this world," sort of introducing the ideas of the spirits and the communication with the living beings out in the spiritual realms, how we are all spirits, how the kingdom of God, but the kingdom of all of us is not this world, is really a life of a spiritual nature, as Zhu was talking about earlier. And then he goes on to follows that through. There are many houses in many mentions in in God's kingdom, right? In my Father's many houses in my Father's mansion, where he's starting to expand that view and discussing the life of spirits beyond just around our planet, but beyond out in the universe, and to try to give us some sense of how that's possible, how that makes sense, or discussing this whole idea of, well, we are spiritual beings, and unlike different faiths that believe we are here just once and that's it, and that's the opportunity that we have, what would be the point of that? Well, he starts introducing the topic of reincarnation in chapter number 4. And so in chapter number 5 is where he starts, so he started by expanding out there so that we could understand, see the world of the spirits and understand it a little better. But now, how does that affect each one of us? And that's chapter 5, the chapter that we are studying now. And last month, I guess Mackenzie talked about briefly about the start of this chapter, where he talks about the justice of afflictions. But so the chapter is called "Blessed Are the Afflicted," right? Jesus in Luke, in chapter 6 of Luke, verses 20 and 21, he says, he looked at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of God belongs to you. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh." This understanding of God's justice, is one of the big questions around religion, around Christianity in general. Why Why do we even take times of our lives to try to be religious, or to be a part of a religious movement, or to even seek religion or this connection to God again? And often it starts with our understanding or our actual misunderstanding of our afflictions, of what God has put in front of us as our afflictions. So in the section of this chapter that we're going to discuss today, it starts with, it's called the causes of present day afflictions. And, so why does it make sense to talk about this right after the discussion on reincarnation, which was our previous chapter, right? A lot of the understanding, a lot of the thinking behind, God and God's justice has been to try to understand how it's possible that God can be this great, Father, Mother, Creator, that is all loving, all just, and yet, we look at people that have come from different backgrounds, people who were born with different situations, diseases, etc. And so, the understanding of reincarnation, as chapter 4, or the previous chapter was put forth, it helps us understand God's justice. It helps us see that there is a lot more beyond. There's a lot more to God's justice and to God's givings to us. A lot more than just this life alone. We tend to see the world with the eyes that we have right now, and we tend to not see the spiritual nature of our lives, both after death, but also before death. And so the understanding of reincarnation allows us to open our minds and start to understand God's justice as, as going from over multiple existences in this world, not only this life, but also, what has happened to us before and what will happen to us as spirits in the future. So, we get into Spiritism, or we start studying Spiritism, and we start thinking, okay, well, everything is reincarnation. We like to think simply. We like to think simple concepts. So, we start studying this and say, wow, well, that explains a lot. So, a lot must have happened in my previous life for me to suffer this much. I suffered constantly, so something must have happened in my previous life. Nothing works for me. Everything I do ends up in failure, right? And then we start blaming our past, and we say, well, previous life I must have been really bad. Or, I'm really poor right now. I must have been really rich in my previous life, right? Start trying to make these logical or sort of binary connections of, well, I feel like, a lot of people hate me today. So, in the last life, I must have ruled over a lot of people, and they're just now, hating me, and because they come from a different past, and now I just have to pay for this in this life, and so in the way that we like to simplify our thinking, things start making sense when we think that way. So, well, a lot of good things happen to other people, but it never happens to me. So it must have been something from another life. Well, this section of the chapter is not about that. this section of the chapter is really talking about today's afflictions, causes of present day afflictions. Because, you know, I mean, some people will listen or read this message for the first time just as they're reading or they're starting to learn Spiritism or study Spiritism for the first time. But a lot will read this lesson much later, once they started thinking, you know, reincarnation, karma. It's because something happened, you know, something I did in past lives is coming back to haunt me. And we start getting lazy that way. We start thinking in that very sort of one mindset of keeping things simple and just blaming reincarnation. And not everything is about reincarnation. I mean, clearly God's justice works in, you know, over multiple lives, right? We can't understand it. Can't fathom really the justice of God being the same, or God treating us all the same when a child is born with microcephaly, for example, or some other birth defect, and you know, you look at that child, and how does that child have the same treatment by God? How is God treating that child the same way that He's treating me, or somebody who's rich, or somebody who's poor, or whatever, right? So to understand God's justice, we need this element of you know, a spiritual life of reincarnations and multiple worlds, right? And that's how we got to chapter 5. But there is suffering, right? We live in a planet where suffering is not supreme. You can't say that you know, that suffering is what our lives are all about. On the contrary, I think that the proposition of tonight's discussion is that, you know, it's obviously we are responsible for a good chunk of it, but it doesn't mean that our lives have to be made out of just pure suffering. You know, we are in a planet of atonement and trials. And so we will go through some tough times. It's part of our atonement. It's part of our trials. But, you know, it's not what life is all about, even in this planet, even, you know, as we study and understand that this planet will evolve just like us as spiritual beings will evolve one day. So why do we suffer, right? Why do we suffer? That question was sort of answered last month, but I wanted to bring it up again. You know, if God is just, there has to be a just cause for our suffering. We don't suffer just because. We suffer because there is a just cause. It's different to think, well, we just suffer because God wants us to suffer, or we don't suffer when God doesn't want us to suffer. That's a very childish, you know, not childish, I guess. If we look at early Christianity or an early understanding of the Christian faith, it's sort of in that beginning, this understanding of, you know, God just wants me to suffer or not suffer. God will just give us punishment. Well, yes, as we will learn through our studies, we will see, as we learn through the Gospel according to Spiritism, we will see that suffering is a consequence of not learning or not applying the message of Jesus, the message of God, the laws of God, the laws of love in our lives. However, they're mostly consequences of what we do. And the stuff that's not consequences of what we do, they're consequences of what we have done. And that's where reincarnation comes in. But we'll move from that point and go into the present day afflictions. So it's a very interesting piece of text that Kardec put together here. To split our understanding of the vicissitudes or the afflictions, the vicissitudes of life or our life's afflictions, as being of two kinds. One, and very important to distinguish, as he says here. Some have their cause in present day life, while others arise outside of this present life. Next month, whoever presents the study will be talking about past causes of afflictions. And this is a long chapter. It's actually, in fact, is one of the longest chapters in the book, I think. Isn't it? So, I mean, it's, I'm just going to look at the numbers here. I like studying the book itself just because it's an interesting understanding of how Kardec was organized it all. But you can look at every single book, every single chapter, and this is except for the chapter where he's essentially giving us ideas of how to pray, which come towards the end. This is the book that has the most items. There are 31 items. So we will be studying this book for the whole next year, maybe. Everything about afflictions. So don't be afflicted. Hopefully, over the next few months, we will work on our afflictions. With that in mind, we can start then talking about present causes of afflictions. It's when we seek answers, like seeking religion, we always want something easy. But that's the interesting thing, and that's what keeps Spiritism interesting to me, to this day, and I imagine for the longest time, is because to understand our place in our own lives, our place in God's kingdom, right? We need to take time and understand ourselves. We need to take time and look into how it is that we deal with all of our tendencies, all of our vices, all of our with every situation that we find ourselves in. And so, Kardec in this text, he starts by asking us, going back to the origins of early misfortunes, it must be recognized that many are just natural consequences of character and the behavior of those who suffer them. It's hard for us to admit sometimes that we made a mistake, that we are on the wrong, that we did something that wasn't quite right. It's a lot easier to blame the other person. It's a lot easier to say, well, I only hit him because he was making me angry, but he was the one that made me angry, right? It's easy to blame the other person. It's always easy to blame the situation. Well, I'm not sure why I did that. I was drunk, right? We blame the situation that where we were in, as opposed to putting ourselves in that position and creating a bad situation. So, he starts by asking how many fail through their own fault? How many are the victims of their own thoughtlessness, pride, or ambition? Right? How many destroy themselves through lack of discipline, misconduct, or from not knowing how to limit their desires? How many disastrous marriages are due to the fact that they were built on calculated interest or vanity in which the heart took no part? How many illnesses and diseases stem from intemperance and excesses of all kinds? Now, this book was written, or I guess published in 1866, right? 64, yeah, sorry, this is, I guess, the second copy. No, the third edition. I was revised, 1866. Medicine was not nearly close to where we are today. And this guy is writing about how many illnesses and diseases stem from intemperance and excess of all kinds. Intemperance. Excess of all kinds, of course, he could point to, people drinking too much wine or beer or whatever, different spirits, different alcohol. So, of course, it was already known at that time, you drink too much, your liver is going to explode eventually, right? So I think that was well understood in 1866. But intemperance, how does intemperance, being angry, being always, on the edge, how does that affect your health, right? This guy was talking about, intemperance affecting our health. Today, we know, how many people have a heart disease, a heart attack at the worst time, when they're angry or when they have strong emotions, right? That happens to a lot of people. Of course, they have some physical predisposition, but if I have a heart attack because I'm angry, I can't blame my heart. I can't blame my genetic predisposition to have a heart that will fail when I'm angry. It's my anger that caused it, right? But we are a little too proud to think that way, to admit to ourselves how it is our own predisposition to affect our body with excess hormones that will cause chemical imbalances that will cause our heart to fail. We are too proud sometimes to admit to ourselves that that's the cause. As Kardec points out, our vanity doesn't let us think that way. So we go on blaming everything else. We blame we will blame those around us, but also, we tend to blame God. If we have some sort of, especially those people who haven't really undergone a sort of personal transformation to get a sense of what God means to their lives. It's very easy for them to stop and ask, well, if God created me, or say, if God created me and my heart is this weak, it's God's fault that I am like this. And, we just live with that as our going thinking process. And that's with everything. Our vices, right? How many of us, have a vice of envy? Okay. Well, what's envy? And how is talking about envy related to affliction? Well, a lot of our lives is lived inside of our own minds, right? We look out there and we look at how many people are going to psychologists, psychiatrists for all kinds of different reasons. But how often is it that we're just trying to get something that somebody else has? how often is it that we're just saying, well, no, I just want a better life? Is that really true? Is that what we want? Well, I want a bigger house. Well, why is that? Is it because your house is the smallest house in your neighborhood and now everybody's house looks freshly painted and you haven't repainted your house in 10 years? Well, I'll have a better life when I paint my house. Is that the case, or do you just want to show to your neighbors that you can have what they have? And we let that envy consume our lives, right? I mean, the example of a house. There are many things that we have in our houses that we can say are necessities. We need a roof, right? We need bathrooms. We need places to sleep, etc. But do I really need the three-car garage just to put the third car that I never use in there, right? So envy, will drive my mind crazy. It will, even if I don't have an outburst of anger or disappointment at, or anger at my neighbors, but maybe I have a disappointment in myself or in those around me, or, my kids spend too much money, my spouse spends too much money, now I can't have what I want. And all because of what? Because of envy. And so we live afflicted by what we say we need, when really it's what we want, but it's mostly because it's what other people have, and therefore I want it. So I need it, right? So our basic needs are not being met enough by, having shelter, having food, having people around me. I'm not happy because, I don't have enough of what those around me have. Well, but then I'm not going to live complaining about that. So, I say I have an accepting mindset, and I live as a I consider myself, well, I'm not the poorest person in the world, I know that, but I'm not rich, and and there's all these people out there that are rich, right? The 1%, the 2%, 3%, whatever. And so I don't spend my life necessarily trying to better my own life and the life of others, right? I spend my life looking at the life of others and, getting angry or showing the world how they're not achieving what they say they are. So, for example, maybe I go, maybe I live I say, well, I live my life, I try to do the best that I can. I go to my church, or I go to the Spirit Center, I go to whatever. And I really think it's important that we help the poor, right? And then I watch the news, and I see that Elon Musk, right, one of the richest people in the world, has just launched a really, really big rocket into space. How much did he spend? Like $90 million or something like that? And so, not only that, he thinks, well, we just need to put something heavy, because that was the objective of the mission, was to put something heavy up there. So he says, well, the car that I drive, how about we just send that car? Because that's about the weight that we need to send to show that, our technology is doing what it needs to do. So let's put that, let's make it cute. Let's put a little robot in there and put a whole bunch of geeky references, and make it play a song forever, and just launch it into space and just leave it over there. So, a lot goes into, and by the way, I'm a little bit of a big fan of technology, so that's why my example this week. So, he sends Starman out into orbit, and it's going to be orbiting the sun for a really, really long time. And then, you know, people wake up and say, wow, you know, this really rich man, how many people could have been helped by the money that he spent on this rocket to make this joke? Sent the car, sent a really expensive car, by the way. That car is not cheap, into space. And now, you know, threw all this money away. And it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the poor people. Well, are you helping the poor people? Do you have $90 million to help the poor people? I don't. But it's his money, right? Now, I'm a nice person. I'm a good person. I go to my spiritual place or my place of worship wherever I go every week, and you know, so if I did have those $90 million, I would definitely be helping the poor more than sending a rocket into space. I don't know. I call that envy. I think that is, and I'll explain why. I am not against helping the poor people. That's completely not the message here, by the way. We have to help the poor. We each have to do what we have to do. It's my part, it's your part, it's everybody's part to do what we can to help this world. Helping the poor, the financial poor, helping the people who are poor in health, helping the people who are poor in mental health, helping the people who are poor emotionally, helping everyone that we can, whenever we can, to the greatest of our possibilities. I agree with that wholeheartedly. However, I don't agree with us, and this is why I call it, you know, to me it was ironic that I read some of this stuff on Facebook. Now, go back to the 1960s or the 1950s, when all of the technology that we know today was being developed. All this money wasted in putting satellites up into space, blowing up stuff because we couldn't figure out how to put it up there. You know, people going into the moon, onto the moon, building these space stations, you know, doing all of that. And, you know, you could look at it and say, wow, so many people could have been helped by all of that. I look at the results today of all of that, and I believe that the ability to communicate and to show what's going on at every corner of this world, with every person in the world, with the ability to have a cell phone, for example, and video out their cries for help and so on, makes this a better planet. It helps us reach out to people, makes us be able to interact with each other more. And over time, there is a lot of positive that comes from that, because you know what? Without all of this, we wouldn't know of any of the suffering that you might be helping in Africa, in Northeast Brazil, or wherever, right? But if no money had been invested in any of this, none of us would have cell phones or Facebook or a platform to be complaining about how the rich man just put a car up there in space. Now, if we go back even further, right? 1500s, 1400s, right? The explorer going out of Europe, expanding into the Americas, right? Now, if you lived in Europe, you had no idea how far that sea could go. You would take a boat, you would just keep going, right? The Portuguese, the Spanish, etc. Exploring the world. I don't know. His goal is to explore the universe in the same way that the early Europeans in the 1500s and the 1400s were exploring this world. Now, is that absolutely necessary? I don't know. Was it necessary for the Europeans to come to the Americas? I don't know. I wouldn't be here if that had not happened, right? And I
I believe that I'm here for many reasons, of course, but I believe that I am where I need to be. And that would have not happened if the Europeans in the 1500s were not spending the money and, taking the risks to come out here. So I don't believe it's fair for us to look at a situation like this and be envious of the position that the man finds himself in, or the technology company that he founded finds itself in trying to expand the reaches of the human race past our existing planet. So, all of this, to me, it's nothing but envy. And I think, the more I looked at it, the more I realized we're just angry that we either don't have the 90 million, or that we can't be the ones to help the people that are poor, or that he's not helping the poor people that I want to help, or do the things that I think are right. Instead of trusting, and this is a bigger portion of all of this, trusting that this is, his plan, and that there are the same way that we have a reason to be in our position. A man with that much power, right, or that much money, wouldn't be able to do. He wouldn't be able to do that if he hadn't gone through everything that he did. So we each have to go through our own ways of doing what we think is best. And at the bottom of his explanation is he wants to see humans in Mars. Is that possible? Is it not possible? That's a goal. Same thing as the Europeans. We want to see more people out in those lands on the other side of the world, right? And so, it's hard for us to judge today where this will lead in 50 years or 100 years, right? But if we only look at things like this and only see the bad in it, then all that's showing is our own bias, our own envy. And so we can live, and like I said, I like technology in general, so I was super excited to see that personally. But, if all I can see from that is something negative, then that's an affliction that drives my life. And that's probable, it's quite possible that, if that's the way you think, everything that you see that's unjust, instead of, you trying to make it better, you just find ways to complain how it's not so good. So one of the things that Kardec invites us to do is to look inside ourselves, to look at how we are dealing with the world, interacting with the world, and study our own conscience closely, and go back to see, exactly what are the things that are happening in my life that are not going to the way that I planned, and really ask if it's my plan or if it's my execution, right? Is it what I'm doing, or is it, really just bad luck or bad karma? If all I can see in everything is the negative side of everything, I'm going to look at my life and see that everything in my life goes the opposite way to what I'm dreaming of, or I'm expecting of life. And I spend all the time thinking about that and complaining about it and doing nothing to turn it around. And that's the invitation that Kardec has for us, is to take the time to look back and really study our own conscience closely. Because there are things that are obvious in our lives, or at least obvious to those around us sometimes, right? People who always say, well, You know, I wish I would learn more of this. I don't know. I wish I was a nurse to help more people. Well, did you take the time to study and get into a school for nursing? Well, no, it's really expensive. Well, did you try to figure out how you would pay for that if that's really what you want? Well, no, that would mean I'd have to work too hard. Well, if your goal was to be a nurse, uh, there are steps to get there. Now, there are people who are in a better position than you are to get there. There are people who start from a different spot in life. There are people who are, to whom certain things come more easily, both materially or intellectually, etc. But if all I do is complain about how my dream of being this or doing that never happened, but I'm not looking back and saying, this was the plan, this is how I execute the plan, these are the steps that I can take to get there. If you haven't done that yet, go back and do that first, right? Because, there are various prescriptions in our lives, we can see from those around us that work. It's, am I willing to take the time to make it work? Or am I going to take the easy, as Kardec points out, vain life, or excuse and blame bad luck, blame punishment, blame my previous lives? Well, I must have been really ignorant my last life, because it's still really hard for me to understand everything, right? We always have an excuse for everything. Actually, I have a friend who's dead, who tells me his dad used to tell him this: we do everything we want in life. For the rest, we find excuses. And I'm a big believer in that. I mean, you can't always reach everything that you want, but if you don't do it in a way that you attempt to get there, or that all your effort is going towards what you really want, then you're just doing something else. And that something else is the excuse why you're not doing what you say you want to do. So this invitation back to look into ourselves is, I think, the key to the message that Kardec wanted to bring to us here. Now, there's another type of affliction, I think, that I wanted to bring separately from this. And there's a text that I translated from Portuguese that I might get to if we have time. But the other type of affliction that I thought, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk just about it, especially, is around forgiveness. A lot of our lives is affected by our ability to let things go and forgive people who have done wrongs to us. And it's a really tough message to get, because it's very hard to forgive. It's very hard to have suffered something from someone else, and look at them and say, I forgive you, or to just believe in that forgiveness ourselves and really free ourselves from that. Because forgiveness is, the recipe for getting rid of a lot of our afflictions is to forgive those who those who have affected us in different ways. And sometimes we spend or waste a lot of time, suffering and being afflicted by how that person has affected us. Whether we spend days upon days thinking of how we might get revenge, or how we might interfere with their lives in different ways, or get like try to turn whoever's their friends to be my friends, or try to cause havoc in their lives. And no matter how much time we devote to thinking that we're making their lives easier, we're really just making our lives harder. We're just spending time and wasting time and our energy in devoting so much to the hate or the unhealthy feelings towards that person, that we forget to live our own lives, that we forget to take the time to enjoy those around us. Sometimes we hate other people so much that we actually let that affect the lives of others whom we supposedly love, right? So we will avoid doing certain things because of that person, and that affects me and affects those around me. I will spend my time thinking about that person, while that person is probably not thinking about me. And all of that wasted time and energy is just yet another excuse for us to not work on the things we say we want to work on, the good things we say we want to work on, whether it's helping others, whether it's helping ourselves, making ourselves better, making others better. So our friend Larry was the one who pointed out to me the cool thing about the word love. I mean, about the word forgiving. That but the definition of love. As he mentioned to me once, says love. You can say it in just one phrase. Love is forgiving. We give love. Love is made forgiving. Forgiving is part of love. We are here. We come to a place of worship. We come to a place to our Spiritist center, to our churches or whatever, to try to reconnect more with God. And the one thing that God asks of us is love. Love of us forgiving to others, love of us forgiving others, and loving of God, because the only way to love God is to love everything that God has created, right? Whether that creature is someone who really did something to me, and it's just hard, whether it's figuring out a way to love that person or loving all of God's creation. It's all a part of the plan. It's all a part of what God is asking us at all times. So, when we let ourselves be afflicted by, what others have done to us, we are just not loving. And that's not what, and that's kind of wasting the time that the precious time that God is giving us to give our love, to forgive, and to give our love to Him and to others. I hope this conversation was enlightening to you all, like it was, studying about it to me. I always think of our friend Fatima who says, who said the first person who listens, who hears the words that are coming out of my mouth are the closest ears. And in the same way that I hope, that I think the words read tonight and the message of the night, the same way that I hope it will affect me, I hope that it will affect each one of you. And God bless you all. And may us have a good night. And will we have the passes? I guess Mackenzie's coming to give us some announcements. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
So before we go to the passes, I'd just like to, like Hendrik said, give some announcements here about some other conferences that are going to happen, not on this Spirit Center, but in Malden. Now in the month of March. There will be two special meetings this month of March. One is Divaldo Franco is going to be back here. He's going to come on the 10th of March, which is a Saturday afternoon. And he's going to talk about life after life. The main talk, and the talk is always in Portuguese, but there's always simultaneous translation to English. So for those who cannot understand Portuguese, there's always people there to translate to English. So the tickets are already being sold online. We're not going to receive any tickets here. So there are these small pamphlets. So if you want to take some of these pamphlets, they are up there outside. So there's the website, and you can go online and buy the tickets. They are $50 before right now, and if you leave, if you don't buy it before and you want to buy it there, which I don't recommend because usually there's no space, there's no room. If you get there, there's basically no more tickets to be sold. It's going to be $60. So it's $50, and it includes one book. So you buy the ticket, and you get a book and be able to watch Divaldo. And it's going to be at the Holiday Inn in Somerville, which was they've been doing there for quite a few years. Past 2 years was not there, but then they're returning to that Holiday Inn in Somerville. This is March 10th. And on March 27th, which will be, of course, close to the end of the month, and it's going to be a Tuesday night, Haroldo Dutra Dias will be there at the Spirit Center in Malden, and he's going to talk about discovering who you are, discovering who we are. I'm not positive that it will be translated to English, although when these people, it says there, okay, that's good. It doesn't say it here, that's why I was not sure. But it will also be translated to English, so if you have a friend that doesn't understand Portuguese, but you want to invite a person to go to watch, to listen to what Haroldo has to say or what Divaldo has to say, March 27th, that's a Tuesday night. It will start at 7 p.m. and the invitation is going to be $10. So you can also buy the invitation online. Tickets, the website is right here, akssna.com, but you can also get these pamphlets outside and to remember the website. So those are the two main announcements. This week, on Thursday, there will be another lecture there in Malden as well from the psychologist that works with Divaldo in Brazil. He has books about suicide prevention, and he's going to talk about suicide prevention this next Thursday night, starting at 7 p.m. So if you want to, his name is Marlon Haigdal. He's from São Paulo, and he is going to be there talking about suicide prevention. So if you're interested in the topic, this one. I suppose there will be no English translation. He's from São Paulo. He will be there. There's no. It's free of charge. You can just get there and arrive and watch. The address is 2 Elm Street in Malden. It's the site for the Grupo Espírita Caminho Verdade e Vida, Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts. That's the name of the Spiritist Center there. And one last thing, we will. We'd like to say, as Chris always reminds us, about the God at Home or Gospel at Home, that night, that day during the week when we choose a few minutes to sit with our family, with our friends, and read a book and read a message, so that we invite the good spirits, we invite Jesus to our home, and we open the doors for this conversation around the gospel, around the teaching, so that we can bring this calmness, this love, this understanding to our home and to the surrounding neighbors that live in our community. And having said that, we will have the passes. If you want to take the passes, just stay where you are. They will invite you to go to the little room there, and after that we'll have our final prayer so we can finish our meeting.